So we just hit record. And right before we hit record, you said something really insightful. You said, man, it's just so great to have conversations about our business and what we're doing whenever we're like making sales and the business is growing, we've got momentum and all of that. And it's like so true. When things are going well, it's so fun to talk about what are we doing moving forward. Why is that the case? It's because, man, circumstantially there's abundance, and our circumstantial abundance affects our mind, and the way you start to view things impacts the way you do things, right? It's really easy when things are going well to, man, be creative, to be intentional, to be proactive, to be future oriented, to see opportunity and not just obstacles. But what I have seen to be true is the best leaders I've ever worked with, ever worked around, ever worked for, they like all have this in common. They've cracked the code on they can have an abundance mindset even when circumstances aren't yet abundant. And instead of saying, man, I'm going to allow circumstance to affect my mind, rather they say, I'm going to have an abundance-oriented mindset, and that's going to impact and affect my circumstances. The principle there is pretty simple. Like, the way you view things impacts the way you do things. That's why it's so critical as leaders to be able to identify and then root out scarcity in our mindset.
How is an abundance mindset different than like poor stewardship? What's the dynamic, or how do those two things interact? Like, you're not operating from a position with an abundance mindset of like, oh, nothing matters and I'm not going to steward the resources I have. But there is something different there that I think is important to zone in on.
Yeah, if there's something specific you'd like to highlight, I'd like to hear it. But one kind of key distinction between healthy abundance and unhealthy abundance is what I would say is gratitude. What we are not saying is, man, we need to think about the future and about how we're going to pursue overflow in the future because what we have right now just simply isn't enough. I think that's incredibly unhealthy. I also don't think it's biblical, right? Paul said, I've learned to be content with little. I've learned to be content with much. So can we operate in a posture of contentment, centeredness, and maybe even balance today while overflowing into the future that we're stepping into?
So if gratitude is the root for an abundance mentality, what's the root for scarcity?
I would say anxiety. I don't know, we could play that out a little bit, but it's interesting to think about that neurologically, we know that gratitude is actually the antidote to anxiety. Like, the two cannot exist in the brain at the same time. So it would make sense to me that anxiety in the core emotion of anxiety is fear would be the opposite of gratitude.
So today we're talking about scarcity and like 5 signs that you may be operating from a position or from a perspective of scarcity. Where did this come from?
My journaling. and that's not journaling on like, oh, let me think of some content that would be helpful for other people. No, it was my personal journaling of saying, man, what do I know to be true about the moments when I'm at my worst as a leader, right? That's actually a really helpful exercise, is like, think about the moments when you were at your worst, and then think about, in those moments, what were the common denominators? Without a shadow of a doubt, like, if I list my worst moments as a leader and then I say, what are some of the common denominators of all of these moments? Irrefutably, a scarcity-oriented mindset can be one of the common denominators. And so therefore, hopefully, being abundance-minded about the future, I'm like, I should pay attention to this and look for the warning signs or the check engine lights so that whenever I am operating in scarcity, I or the people around me that I trust can notice it, call it out, and then we can respond to it effectively.
So what are some of these signs? I guess, what's the first one?
Yeah. So, I mean, really, I think I listed 9 or 10 or something like that and posted on LinkedIn, and we can include the link to that post in the show notes of this episode if people want to read the full one. But it was interesting to see some of the comments and some of the feedback that people gave, because it clearly really resonated with people. The first one was really kind of the language we're using on here is a need for validation. And this is a sign, right? This is not scarcity in itself. This is a sign. This is a check engine light saying like, hey, you might be operating in scarcity. And here's what this really looks like. You as a leader desperately need someone to tell you that you are doing enough. And unless people are constantly and consistently telling you, hey, you're doing enough and you're doing a good job, you feel inadequate, insecure, or insufficient.
Why can validation feel so intoxicating, or can it? Why do we often wrap our identity around like this external validation?
I guess I can speak to why I sometimes do that. Because when things are going really well, this can feel very attractive, right? Like if I'm performing well, then why not attach my identity to my performance? Because I'm getting all of these pats on the back. People are often telling me how great I am, the great work that I did and all of that. And I'm internalizing that, right? As like, I am great because of the things that I did. The thing that I think can be really challenging about that is you are a human being, so therefore you're imperfect. And if you tie your value and worth to the headlines, you can't then say, oh, but I'm not going to listen to the critics at all. It doesn't work like that, right? Like if you listen to the highest headlines and you allow that to inform where your value comes from as a human being, the critics are going to crush you because you've already stated your standard, and that is other people's opinions tell me how I'm doing. I think one caveat that I would give to this too is I actually think validation, encouragement, and affirmation are something that is good for leaders in healthy doses and from trustworthy sources. What we are talking about here is a desperate need and hunger that without other people constantly telling you you're doing okay, or you're doing a good job, or you're doing enough, without someone regularly telling you that, you feel like you're not doing enough. And in many ways, that's you making yourself the center of the universe and tying your value and worth to other people's validation.
How do you grow out of that? Or what are some things that you can do to posture yourself to grow out of that?
Re-immerse yourself in where your value comes from on a consistent basis, right? Romans 12:2, do not be conformed to the ways of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that by testing you may discern the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect, right? The way of the world is to say, my value comes from my performance. And unless you take intentional action to renew your mind, you will conform to the way of the world. And so we have to regularly renew our mind of where value comes from. And yeah, that's critically important when things aren't going well, obviously, but it's equally important, if not more important, when things are going well. So when cash flow's down, when a team member just left, when you have unhappy customers, that's a really good time to say, this business is not who I am. This business is where I serve. But also, when cash flow is the best it's ever been, when your team is growing, when customers are thrilled and talking about how great your business is, that's also an unbelievably healthy time to say, this business is not who I am. This business is where I serve. And man, I can speak from my own personal playbook. My growth has not come from just giving myself a pep talk when things are going poorly. My greatest growth has actually come from remembering where my identity actually comes from and where my security comes from when things are going well. Because that's where my character is revealed, is how I handle good things, and don't say this is all because of me, my willpower, my effort. Rather say, praise God, what a blessing this, but at the end of the day, this isn't who I am, and all of this could go away and it wouldn't change one iota about my identity.
This segues into the next point. We're talking about when things aren't going well. The next sign of scarcity is dwelling on catastrophe. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm super good at answering the question, what's the worst that could happen? And I don't even think that that's bad. all the time, right? Because I think in some ways, if risk is threat times vulnerability, then we should probably be aware of the risks that we're taking and how vulnerable we are to those particular things happening. That in some ways can be good stewardship. What I found myself doing though is dwelling on, living in, becoming unbelievably familiar with the worst case scenario question. Like I was so good at that question. And it's not even I wasn't spending much time. I was not spending any time on what's the best that could happen. And the way you view things impacts the way you do things, right? And if I was best friends with the worst case scenario and I didn't even know the best case scenario, that is going to affect my actions. It's going to affect my words. It's going to affect my decisions. And it did. And in some ways, it became a self-fulfilling prophecy of, first of all, the worst. I have never yet had the worst case scenario ever happen, but it did create negative results. Whereas if I would have become better friends with the best case scenario, that probably could have actually generated some of those results too. So we should probably spend some time there.
Is part of the reason why it's easier to dwell on worst case scenario because we don't want to be disappointed if best case scenario doesn't happen? Like what's...
Yeah, I think that's super wise.
Yeah,
probably.
And I guess what's the cost of risking disappointment versus just continuously living in this state?
Yeah. I mean, are you playing to win or are you just playing not to lose? I think is what you're really asking there. And I think a lot of times if I'm not careful, I'm playing not to lose, right? I was doing a race called the Crown King Ultra Marathon, which is, they call it Spines to Pines because you go from Lake Pleasant, surrounded by saguaro cacti here in Arizona, and then you run up to Crown King, which I don't know what the gain is, but it's like the entire race is uphill and you end up in cold weather in the pines by the end of it. It's a pretty epic race. It's a 50-kilometer race. And I was probably, 25 miles into this thing. And I had passed this guy that he and I had been going back and forth for a while. We've been leapfrogging each other for a while. And I finally passed him and I had stayed in front of him for a while. And my mental dialogue the whole time, kind of around mile 25 was, gosh, I hope I can stay in front of that guy. I hope I can stay in front of that guy. He's coming. And anytime I would stop to get, a drink or some electrolytes or something like that, I'm just always thinking like, he's catching up to me. He's coming to get me right now. Right. Meanwhile, this guy's a stranger. I have no idea who he is, but I'm in my head. I'm like, he's coming to get me. And then something clicked at mile 25 where I just said, what if you stop thinking about the person that's coming to catch you? And what if you start thinking about the person that's right in front of you that you're going to catch? And it was crazy. Like that single thought, like it was literally just something that ran through my head. I started running faster. I started being more intense. I started to have more fun. And it's because instead of running not to lose to some stranger, I was actually running to win, saying like, what could I actually do here? And I think that kind of clarifies, like, when we start to not dwell on the obstacle or dwell on the loss that could occur, but start dwelling on what winning looks like, it's going to impact your effort because your belief system has been impacted.
I know we already kind of touched on gratitude a little bit, but how does that speak into this point specifically?
One of my most common prayers that I discovered whenever I looked at like, man, what is the thing that I'm repeatedly praying for is provision. And we could look at that and say, oh man, that's a really good thing to pray for. And to a certain extent, I think it is a really good thing to pray for. But I read something by Paul David Tripp about a year ago now that it said, sometimes the thing that you pray for most often is actually reflective of an idol more than it is a genuine request. And so I read that and then realized the thing that I pray for most often is provision. And then I realized my God is a heavenly Father that has assured me he will always provide and he knows what's best for me. Like I know that to be true. And so what I'm doing every single day in praying for provision is the equivalent of my daughter Lily asking me every single day, Dad, can we eat today? If she ever did that, my heart would be broken, because I would just be like, Lily, when have we ever not eaten? Like, when have I ever showed you evidence that I wasn't going to feed you? And in some ways, when we're constantly thinking through the lens of worst case scenario, we're denying a whole canvas of God's faithfulness, of what he's already done for us. And we're not being grateful for that at all. And we're not at all allowing God's reputation for doing more than we can ask, think, or imagine to inform how we think about the future. So that would be my thought on the connection to gratitude.
Man, that's good.
Yeah. That also just, yeah. I mean, people, hopefully this isn't too much of a spoiler alert. That was a massively powerful realization for me. And the illustration, particularly whenever it involves your 2-year-old daughter, like, becomes more powerful. Like, I think that's going to work its way into my opening, operating, and overflow talk at the experience, just because, man, I see so often we keep praying for provision as business owners and business leaders. And God, I think, keeps saying, like, I keep providing for you. Like, can you open your eyes real quick and allow what I am actively doing right now to inform your perspective and the way you engage with the world? So that's one of the ways that I actually got into the writing the content for this episode is the way we're thinking about our experience. It's the theme is operating in overflow, and kind of the functioning line that we're using as the thesis is reject scarcity, what we're talking about right now, and then choose abundance, generosity, and faith as a model for all of life. And yeah, you can see how all of this connects to that very intimately.
Let's move on to the next one.
Yeah. So the next one is fragility. So we have need for validation is sign number 1. Sign number 2 is dwelling on catastrophe. Number 3 is fragility. And this is really the idea that every dip or loss or setback or even failure is not just an isolated event. Rather, you take that as proof that the jig is up, that everything is falling apart, and that this isn't going to work anymore. And yeah, I mean, we can go wherever you want to go with this, but this can still be prevalent for me if I'm not careful. But if I think back to 3 or 4 years ago, Alex, man, this is something that I really had to grow through to just realize it's not true.
Well, it's very similar to the other two in the fact that, like, you're placing your identity and your worth in external circumstances, whether that's validation of other people, that's the thought that you can predict the future, or, you know, in this case, whatever is coming your way at any given moment based on your circumstances. I guess on this note, like, what would you say is one thing a leader can do to increase their resilience?
One thing that is related to the last experience we did is expand your time horizon beyond just the moment that you're in right now. And so what I'm really thinking about here is I was recently, having dinner with a mentor of mine. You know that someone's about to whop you upside of the head when they pay for your steak, is what I feel like. And he bought the steak that night, right? And so we were just talking about some stuff, and he had some great feedback for me. And one of the things that I kept expressing to him is like, man, I want to have this goal, like, of just every single month is cash flow positive, and we're not writing, you know, the business isn't as lumpy with our experience expenses and all of that, right? Like, I just want to see this linear up into the right trend. And he just looked at me. This guy is wildly, wildly successful. And he looked at me and he goes, I think that's a very immature goal, is what he said. And he said, as a business owner, I think that's a very immature goal. And I was like, wah, wah, like, glad he's paying for my steak. But what he said is, he's like, there's going to be seasons as a business owner where if you are stewarding this well and doing your job, you're making calculated investments in the future that are going to affect your month over month cash flow. And he basically said, like, if your, like, scoreboard is always monthly cash flow, you're never going to make long-term investments for the future because you're always looking at that very short-term number. And I thought that was so good, right? Because identity was very, in a fragile way, fragility related to this monthly cash flow report and me needing to be affirmed on that every 30 days. And he was saying, dude, first of all, your identity isn't related to a cash flow report at all. But let's also not even tie your emotional state to some arbitrary 30-day marker. Let's just make sure that the financial bets we're making are really intentional. And I thought that was such difficult, but also helpful advice to receive.
Yeah. Dang. Man. I feel like having people in your life who are willing to just be that honest with you is really valuable.
This guy,
and
that's
again,
a strength for this
would
guy.
probably increase your resiliency if you had people in your life who are willing to speak truth like that.
And man, maybe that's a good thing to highlight in Scarcity is like, man, me being in scarcity is not the end of the world because I'm a human being and I'm not perfect. It's really bad as a leader if I stay there. And so me having people, I cannot point out the areas where I am being immature in my thinking. I can't do it, right? Because if I could do it, I would have already done it. And so I need people that will buy me a steak and then tell me you're being ridiculous right now. And so that was invaluable. So don't feel like you have to conquer all of these belief systems on your own or that you even have to notice them all on your own. It's probably wise to get other people in your life that can point these things out.
Yeah. What is that proverb on like a kiss from an enemy? Oh, do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't.
Oh, man. I'm going to look it up right now.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Here we go. Proverbs 27:6. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, it felt like a wound, right? Yeah. Thankfully, he's a friend.
Yeah.
Yeah. So good.
Let's move on to the next one.
So the next one is determinism, which means you allow the past and the present to dictate your future instead of simply informing it. I always think of the same example when I think of determinism. And it's actually, I learned this from my favorite college football podcast host. His name is Josh Pate. He talks about, I particularly remember it a couple years ago. He would talk about, everyone talks about Ryan Day, who is the coach for Ohio State. Everyone talks about Ryan Day, and the narrative around Ryan Day is always the same thing. He can't win the big game, right? He can't win the big game. He can't win the big game. And because there had been moments where he didn't win the big game as a head coach, right? And what Josh Pate would always say prophetically is you are confusing can't with hasn't. And you keep looking at his past win-loss record in big games or his inability to win a national championship up till this point. And you're saying because he hasn't done it, that means he can't do it. And he said, you're very screwed up in your thinking. In reality, Ryan Day is in the neighborhood. And if you're in the neighborhood long enough, you're going to find a national championship. And that's exactly what happened. Like literally the next year, he and Ohio State beat Texas en route to winning the national championship, right?
It's hard for you to use that example.
Oh, gosh. Brutal. Sark is on his way. Steve Sarkisian and Texas are in the neighborhood. I'm going to say that right now. Okay. So that happened. And then the story around Ryan Day was always the same is, okay, he can win the national championship, but he can't beat Michigan, right? This guy can't beat Michigan, to which then, again, Josh Pate says, you are confusing can't with hasn't. And the next year, he obliterated Michigan, right? And so how often is that our self-dialogue? Because I haven't, that means I can't. And that is so screwed up in our thinking, right? You are a human being. Like you can change, you can grow, you can move forward. Your past doesn't have to become your future. But when we start operating in scarcity, we stop believing that. And we think that, man, everything about my past and my present, I'm just going to play that forward into the future. And it becomes like this tragedy narrative that just accepts the status quo as what will forever be. And it's just not helpful.
Well, because I think it creates these beliefs, your previous experiences can sometimes form and create these beliefs that are, in this context, like based on fear, like on those things, either those things happening again or this belief that that's what's always going to happen because it happened in the past.
That's exactly right.
I think what's interesting about this one specifically is if you're using previous experiences to dictate your fear, the fear itself isn't necessarily wrong, because I think the answer to this is wisdom, like having the wisdom to know how those previous experiences can inform your decisions moving forward. And like Proverbs outlines the definition of wisdom to be the fear of the Lord. And it's like, what are you really fearing, and what are you really holding in reverence as like the power that speaks over your life? And it's like, is it God, or is it these previous experiences that you've had?
Yeah. I mean, if we're using a business example now, and we can use a very personal business example, I would say if we were to look at the past 6 years of our business, the area where we have been most bruised and bloodied is the area of delegating business growth. What's so cool is, our business has grown every single year for the 6 years we've been in business. Praise God for that, right? But when we think about delegating business growth, which is really marketing and sales, off of my and our coach's plate into a different arena, and then more than just delegating it, systemizing it to something that's a little bit more predictable and repeatable. Like we've stubbed our toe, and that's putting it lightly a couple times, right? We made mistakes. We've had things go awry. We've had things like that you could have never predicted. Like some things that were going well. It's like then the person that's running it, like someone close to them ends up in prison, and they're like, I can't do this job anymore. And it's like, I didn't read that in any of the leadership books that I ever read, right? And that was the first time we've ever done something well, right? Now, think about this for a second. If from those bad experiences, I adopt the narrative, we just can't solve for this. We can't delegate sales and marketing. We can't grow beyond where we are right now, and we can't ever take this off my plate. If I say we can't, then obviously I'm not going to invest any effort, time, or resources trying to achieve that. Conversely, if the one thing that I change is just the word can't to haven't, we haven't yet been able to delegate sales and marketing in such a way that it's predictable and repeatable. Well, then I just say, well, we haven't yet, but that doesn't mean we can't. It just means we haven't. And praise God, I literally think right now today, we are smack dab in the middle of winning the national championship, of doing the thing we thought for a period of time we could never do. And so just that small tweak in a leader's mindset has massive ramifications for the actions that you take moving forward.
So the last point is hoarding. Can you share about that?
So this came up at a recent event we did for business owners. Someone brought up, they said, we have very proprietary information on particular processes and the way that we do things that makes us incredibly valuable. And they basically said, we don't want to share that with our employees. We don't want them to understand exactly the ins and outs of how we get the results that we get, because if we let them know, then they could leave, or they could take those things, or they could steal them or share them or stuff like that. And number one, I get where he's coming from. And in some ways, like, I'm not going to advocate against wisdom of like signing NDAs and having non-compete agreements, everything that's legally justifiable. I think you should do as a means of proper stewardship of what you have. However, if you operate under the assumption that this one idea or this one process or this one thing that I once had is the thing that makes us valuable, and I am incapable of having other valuable ideas, processes, or differentiating factors in the marketplace, like, you have now established a massive ceiling on your growth that you're never going to get past. And if that ceiling then causes you to say, I'm going to withhold information that would actually help the people on our team be more successful at what they do, because I don't want the worst case scenario to happen, you are now moving from hoarding to self-sabotaging, right? You are actually taking action to make yourself less productive and effective than you could be, because you're so scared of what could happen. And so that's just such a visceral example of what we're talking about here.
When a leader at the top, a business owner, CEO, someone at the top is operating from this position of hoarding and this position of scarcity, like what are some of the implications that you can start to see as you go down the chain?
Yeah. I had a mentor once tell me, he said, Alex, you got to make sure within your team, you never create a culture or tolerate a culture of individual kingdom builders. And that alludes to what you're talking about, I think, is you will have people start to build up fiefdoms of like everyone feels a need to guard their secrets. And so your company, instead of being this collaborative, transparent, open flow of information and ideas and forward motion all in service of the mission, you have individual kingdom builders that are each establishing their own fiefdom with their trade secrets. And the reason why that occurs is because your standards as a leader cascade. Like you can't be a kingdom builder as a leader that's like withholding all this information and trying to make sure you guard your own and make sure that you protect your own stuff and then expect everyone else just to be really, collaborative and forthcoming and creative and proactive. No, like if you do that, it is contagious and other people will do the same thing. And so really it comes down to a decision. Are you going to err on the side of trusting people or not trusting people? And I've just found that erring on the side of not trusting people is a race to the bottom. So err on the side of trusting people and budget for the times when that trust will be broken, because there will be times when trust is broken, and that's why you have an emergency fund, right? And that's actually really practical, helpful advice. So
those are the 5 that we've identified. Is there anything in closing that you would want to say, like as it relates to all of these, before we close out?
I think really the final thing that I would say would be a little bit of a message of hope is like every single one of these, like, is rooted in a deception. It's rooted in a lie. What did Satan come to do? He came to steal, kill, and destroy. Here's what's been so helpful for me to recognize is you can't steal, kill, or destroy something that doesn't exist. Right? So if something's being stolen, that means you have something. If something's being killed, that means there's something that's alive. If something's being destroyed, it means that something good exists. And so literally in the action of steal, kill, destroy is the evidence that it's like you already have so much more than you're ever giving God credit for, quite frankly. And so if we just start to call out the lies for what they are and operate from a posture of truth about the abundance God has blessed us with, the opportunities that are available to us, and the responsibility that we've been blessed with to leverage everything that we currently have in service of other people, oh my gosh, everything about our outlook and therefore our action starts to change.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Ben. Hey, y'all, thanks so much for watching. If you want more content like this, we've got some killer stuff planned. So make sure you rate, review, and subscribe. Let's go, let's go, let's go.